A coupon is an irrational thing. Consider it honestly for a moment. A store marks a shirt at $40, then hands you a piece of paper that takes $10 off, and you feel that you have won something. You have not. The store chose both numbers. It could have simply priced the shirt at $30 and skipped the ritual entirely, and you would have paid the same amount for the same shirt. And yet the version with the coupon feels like a victory, and the version without it feels like an ordinary purchase. The thrill of the deal is not really about the money saved. It is about the feeling of having outsmarted the system, of having gotten one over on the retailer. That feeling is worth more to a certain kind of shopper than the dollars involved. Remember this, because a company more than a century old was about to stake its entire survival on the belief that this feeling did not matter, that customers, if simply offered honest low prices, would happily give it up. They would not, and the discovery of exactly how much they would not cost the company billions of dollars, a century of loyalty, and ultimately its independence. This is the story of a department store founded in 1902 on a promise of fairness, and of the moment, almost 11 decades later, when a brilliant and celebrated executive tried to make it more fair and destroyed it in the attempt. It is one of the fastest self-inflicted collapses in the history of American retail, and its cause was not the economy or the internet or a pandemic. Its cause was a single strategic decision, executed with total conviction, based on a fundamental misreading of who the customer actually was. The company began in 1902, when its founder opened a small dry goods store in a Wyoming mining town. He called his first venture the Golden Rule Store, and the name was not decoration. The founder's principle was that customers should be treated the way the merchant himself would want to be treated: fair prices, honest goods, no deception. From that single store grew one of the great retail empires of the 20th century. Over the following decades, the chain spread across the country, becoming an anchor of American main streets, and then, as the country suburbanized, an anchor of American shopping malls. For millions of middle-class families, it was simply where you bought your clothes, your school outfits, your bedsheets, your appliances. It was woven into ordinary life so completely that it became nearly invisible, the way infrastructure is invisible. You did not think about it. You just assumed it would always be there. For most of the 20th century, that assumption was safe. The company sold reliable, mid-priced goods to the broad American middle, and the broad American middle rewarded it with steady loyalty. But loyalty of that kind carries a hidden danger. A customer base that shops with you out of habit is wonderful right up until the habit is disturbed. And by the early years of the new century, the entire category of the mid-priced department store was being disturbed from two directions at once. From below came the discounters, the enormous, ruthlessly efficient chains that sold similar goods for less and turned shopping into a matter of pure price. From above, and increasingly, came online retail, which offered infinite selection delivered to the door and made the whole idea of driving to a department store feel like an inconvenience. Caught in the middle was the traditional department store, no longer the cheapest option and no longer the most convenient, holding a position defined mostly by history. The company's answer to this squeeze for years was promotion, endless sales. Coupons in the mail, coupons in the newspaper, doorbuster events, percentages off, dollars off. The store trained its customers to wait for the deal, to never pay full price, to treat a shopping trip as a hunt for the markdown. It was not elegant, and the margins it produced were thin, but it worked, because it gave the customer that irrational little thrill. Over and over, and the customer kept coming back for it. By 2011, though, the numbers were sliding, and the board wanted a transformation, not another year of managed decline. So they went and found the most celebrated retail executive in the world. He had come to prominence as the architect of one of the most successful store concepts in history, the gleaming, minimalist retail operation of a certain technology company, where products were displayed like art, where nothing was ever on sale, where the stores generated more sales per square foot than almost any retailer on earth. He was, by universal acclaim, a genius of modern retail. When the struggling department store hired him as chief executive in 2011, the business world treated it as a coup. The man who had reinvented the store was going to reinvent this one. He arrived with a vision of breathtaking ambition and total internal coherence. He looked at the company's endless promotions and saw something broken and undignified. To him, the coupons and the doorbusters and the perpetual sales were a con, a manipulative theater in which the store marked prices up so it could pretend to mark them down, insulting the customer's intelligence in the process. He believed customers deserved better and that they would reward honesty. So he swept the whole apparatus away and replaced it with something he called fair and square pricing. Straightforward, everyday low prices. No games, no coupons, no fake sales. The shirt would just cost what the shirt cost. He also set about remaking the physical stores into a collection of stylish boutiques, bright and modern, closer to the aspirational technology retailer he had come from than to the cluttered mid-market store he had inherited. On paper, it was elegant. Honest pricing, beautiful stores, an end to the exhausting cycle of promotions. It was also, in its conviction, distinctly reminiscent of the technology company he came from, where the founder had famously disdained market research on the grounds that customers do not know what they want until you show them. In that spirit, the new strategy was rolled out with enormous confidence and comparatively little testing on the actual customers who would have to live with it. The company did not pilot the change in a handful of stores and watch what happened. It changed everything everywhere almost at once. The conviction was total, and the conviction was wrong. Because the customers did not experience fair and square pricing as liberation. They experienced it as the disappearance of the one thing they came for. The company's shoppers were not aspirational buyers seeking a curated, dignified experience. They were bargain hunters. They were people who clipped the coupon, who waited for the sale, who felt the little thrill of the markdown, the exact irrational thrill we began with. Take that away and offer them a merely honest price, and you have not freed them. You have removed the entire reason they walked in the door. A price that is simply permanently low gives the shopper nothing to win. There is no hunt, no victory, no coupon clutched at the register. The everyday low price might even be a genuinely good deal, but it does not feel like one, and in retail, for this customer, the feeling was the product. The results were not slow, and they were not subtle. They were among the most catastrophic in the history of American retail. In the first full year under the new strategy, the company's sales collapsed. Annual revenue fell by roughly a quarter, dropping from around $17 billion to about $12 billion in a single year, something like $5 billion of sales simply evaporating. In one quarter, sales at established stores fell by nearly 32% compared with the year before. The company posted a loss for the year approaching $1 billion. Customers did not respond to fair and square pricing by respecting the honesty. They responded by leaving in their millions and taking their business to the very discounters and promotional competitors the new strategy had been meant to rise above. What makes this collapse so instructive is that it was not caused by a bad product or a weak economy or a technological disruption. The stores still sold the same kinds of goods. The country was not in crisis. The internet had not suddenly gotten better overnight. The single variable that changed was the pricing and promotion strategy, and that single variable was enough to vaporize billions of dollars in sales in a matter of months. It is one of the cleanest demonstrations in business history of a simple, brutal truth. You do not get to decide who your customer is. You inherit them, and you either understand them or you do not. This customer had been, in effect, defined by the coupon. The strategy treated the coupon as a bug to be fixed. It was, in fact, the load-bearing wall. To his credit, the executive did not hide from what had happened. As the scale of the disaster became undeniable, he publicly acknowledged that the company had made serious mistakes, and he took personal responsibility for them. But acknowledgement could not undo the damage. The customers who had left did not come back simply because the strategy was reversed. Trust, once a shopper has been given a reason to form a new habit somewhere else, does not snap back into place. After roughly 17 months in the job, the celebrated executive was removed. The everyday low-price experiment was abandoned, and the company scrambled to bring back the coupons and the sales it had so recently abolished. It brought back the promotions. It did not bring back the customers, at least not enough of them and not fast enough. This is the part of the story that is easy to miss and the most important. The failed strategy lasted only about a year and a half, but its consequences did not end when it did. The company had spent the previous decades already weakened, already squeezed between the discounters and the internet, already surviving on thin promotional margins. The transformation was supposed to be the rescue. Instead, it was an accelerant. It burned through cash the company could not spare, drove away customers it could not afford to lose, and consumed the credibility and the time that any turnaround requires. A company in a difficult but survivable position had been shoved, in 18 months, to the edge of a cliff. Everything that followed was an attempt to climb back from that edge, and it was an attempt made with less money, fewer customers, and no more chances. The years after were a long, grinding decline. The company cycled through leaders and strategies, closed stores, cut costs, and tried repeatedly to find a footing. It did not turn an annual profit for most of the decade that followed. And all the while, the deeper problem that had existed before the failed transformation was still there, now much worse. A mid-market department store, loaded with debt, caught between cheaper competitors and online rivals, with no obvious reason for a modern shopper to choose it. The debt in particular became a cage. The company owed billions, and servicing that debt drained the very resources it would have needed to reinvent itself. It could not cut its way to health, and it could not spend its way to relevance, because the money went to the lenders. Then came 2020 and the pandemic that closed stores across the country and cut off the foot traffic that a department store depends on to survive. For a company with almost no financial cushion and one of the heaviest debt loads in American retail, it was the final push. In May of 2020, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. It had been founded in 1902. It entered bankruptcy 118 years later. It is tempting, and it was common at the time, to call this a pandemic casualty. But that is far too generous to the decisions that preceded it. The pandemic was the last weight added to a structure that had been cracked years earlier, most dramatically by the 18-month experiment that had tried to save it and instead knocked away its foundation. The ending has a quiet irony to it. The company was ultimately bought out of bankruptcy by two of the country's largest mall landlords, the very owners of the shopping centers where its stores sat as anchors. They did not buy it because they believed in its retail future so much as because they could not afford to let their malls lose a major anchor tenant, which would have triggered a cascade of further damage across their properties. The century-old retailer, once a destination in its own right, survived in the end largely as a piece of real estate strategy. A store kept alive less for what it sold than for the space it occupied. So what is the lesson beyond the specifics of one department store? It is not that the executive was a fool. He was genuinely one of the most talented retail minds of his generation, and the store concept that made his name was a real and lasting achievement. That is precisely what makes the story so valuable. The strategy that failed so spectacularly was not a stupid strategy. In a different context, a premium brand, an aspirational customer, a product people lined up to buy, that same philosophy of honest pricing and beautiful stores had produced one of the greatest retail successes in history. The failure was not in the idea. It was in applying the idea to a company whose customers were fundamentally different from the ones the idea was designed for. The playbook that had built a temple for people who wanted the newest, most desirable object in the world was imported wholesale into a store for people who wanted, more than anything, to feel that they had gotten a bargain. The strategy did not fail because it was wrong in the abstract. It failed because it was right for someone else. There is a broader warning in that, and it applies far beyond retail. Success in one context creates enormous confidence, and enormous confidence is exactly what makes it possible to carry a winning formula into a context where it will lose. The very brilliance of the earlier achievement was what made the later disaster possible, because it produced a conviction so strong that it overrode the ordinary caution of testing an idea before betting a company on it. The customers were sending a signal, decades long and perfectly clear, about what they valued. The strategy did not fail to hear it. It decided the signal was wrong and that the customers should want something better. Customers do not take instruction on what they should want. They simply leave. And a business that forgets this can discover, as this one did, that a century of loyalty can be spent in about a year and a half. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It describes a corporate bankruptcy and a series of lawful business and strategic decisions based on publicly available filings, public statements, and reporting from credentialed sources. It makes no allegation of wrongdoing by any individual or company. Source links are provided above.